I want to talk about why the UK feels hotter than elsewhere, because, you know, we hit about 40 degrees, but it hits 40 degrees elsewhere, you know, I think in like Spain and places like that, and they feel fine. It's like a nice little holiday. You know, if you see the sort of people who are anti-climate change, and when I say anti-climate change, I don't mean they're trying to fight climate change, I mean they don't believe it exists.
We're all anti-climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
I'm pretty anti-climate change. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of climate change.
So climate change deniers, right? Climate deniers. You'll see them say, oh, well, it's hot in other countries. This isn't so bad. Why are we suddenly acting as though the world is ending?
Once again, you reveal your ignorance.
Yeah, so why don't we go through it? Just a little bit. I want to talk first about the not heat wave that we experienced, you know, a couple weeks ago on the 18th and 19th of July, that Monday and Tuesday, not just past, but I think the week before. It reached over 40 degrees in some places in the UK. A national emergency was declared, I think for the first time in regards to temperature. That's what I've read, at least. A national emergency, at the very least, a national emergency was declared. The Met Office said the exceptionally hot spell could have widespread impact on people and infrastructure. This was before it happened, and surprise, surprise, they were right. And they issued their first ever red warning for those days, the 18th and the 19th of July. As we're all aware, schools closed, trains were cancelled, people were still working, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And there's an estimated just under 950 deaths that were caused by the 2 days. Well, it says the 3-day heat wave in the sources that I've got, but I don't think one of those days actually met the threshold. Yeah. But those 3 days were warmer than usual. So over those 3 days, just under 950 people died. 950 additional people, by the way. So that's not 950 people dying in the UK. That's 950 above what we would expect normally for, you know, a standard day in the UK. So that's insane. To put that in perspective, oh, by the way, as well, almost 10 people drowned as well on those days.
Some kids drowned.
Yeah, because people were going out and swimming to get away from the heat because it's really hot in the UK and we don't really have the facilities for, you know, swimming and whatnot. Like, I mean, you know, you've got to go to, you know, lakes and ponds and things, but there's not really many of them that you're able to swim in. And swimming pools in the UK, they're not super common. You know, it's not like abroad where there's lots of open water that you can sort of swim in. So 10 people drowned, and most of the deaths were on the 18th and 19th. That was 844. And in a typical year, England and Wales would expect to see 791 heat-related deaths. So
in a year?
Yeah, in a year. So just in these few days, we had more people die from the heat than we would expect in a year. And this is all in England and Wales, by the way. And more than half of those people, so about 495, were estimated to have been aged 85 or older, which is roughly 2% of the UK population. So, you know, like it's really affecting older people, but the fact that just under half of them are, you know, under 85 is insane, because you would expect it to be a lot of like the elderly, but that's not, you know, it's not all elderly people that are dying. Like fit, young and healthy people are dying from this too, and that's what the Met Office warned. I want to be clear as well that all of these numbers are estimates. The actual real numbers on excess deaths for heat waves and things like that do take quite a while longer to get. There's, you know, you've got to work with death certificates, and it takes a long while to actually get those hard numbers. But these estimates are usually pretty good. This one comes from Antonio Gasparini at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and as I said, they're not real numbers, they're estimates made from models. Now, that's the heat wave. That's kind of an overview of the heat wave, right? Just roughly, you know, with the death and everything. But again, I saw so many people talking about how the heat wave in the UK is fine. Like, I remember I posted on my Instagram story saying it's like 39 degrees, it's like 40 degrees. And then I had someone from the US, I think Texas, be like, haha, it's way hotter where I am. Like, that 40 degrees, that's barely even 100.
Was this on Twitter?
This was on Instagram. And
because I saw one of our friends reply to someone who was like going on about how the Brits go on about how hot it is. And then Noah replied to them saying, like, didn't you move out of your house because your AC broke?
Okay, so yes, someone did do that on Twitter. So you're talking about Xander Hall. Xander Hall posted this tweet that you're going to see if this is a clip on YouTube, basically talking about how Brits are, you know, weak for complaining about the heat wave being not that bad. And as you can see, the article in the tweet that he's talking about talks about the fires that were happening in London at the time. fires were happening in London and people were dying, and this guy was laughing. And yes, Noah responded, basically saying that Jamp, actually, you responded saying that he'd moved out of his apartment because his AC broke. I quote tweeted it saying, just with all of the screenshots of all of the articles talking about how bad it was here, and saying, hey, our country isn't built for this. Stop making fun of us. Because people do just make fun of British people for complaining about heat waves. I had people that were in Texas or, the south of the United States of America saying, hey, it's way hotter where I am. You've not even broken 100 degrees yet. I guess to 110 here in California, here in Florida, here in Texas. And there are a number of reasons why you can't really say that, because it is a lot worse when it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the UK than when it reaches that in the US. And I can say that from experience, having been in California just a couple weeks before the heat wave.
It's always fine if you're in California. If you're in Spain and it's like ludicrously hot, an amount that you would find ridiculous in the UK, you're always like, this is fine, I'll put some sunblock on.
It's absolutely fine. Yeah. And bear in mind, I traveled across the US. I was in Texas. I was in Arkansas. I was in Florida. I was in California. I was in most of the hot places that you'll find in the US. At some points, I was on a bus that had no AC. And then it was like, those temperatures were unbearable. But when I was in the places, like normal places in the US, any building I went into, it was totally fine. Because they're all built for it. We'll get into that in a little second.
This is exactly why you're doing this story.
That's exactly why I'm doing the story, to let you understand why you shouldn't be making fun of British people for complaining about the heat here. So, as I said, heat waves caused a lot of deaths. In 2020, they caused an additional 2,000 deaths, according to the UK Health Security Agency. And that figure, apparently, is supposed to triple in the next few decades. And that's if we don't do anything, right? Now, obviously, it got real bad in the UK. We know that. I've mentioned the fires already. There were fires across London. Houses burned down. People were dying. Trains were cancelled, not because, it's too hot to drive the trains, because the infrastructure was literally failing.
Yeah.
Tracks buckled, overhead lines stopped working. I'm pretty sure one track caught fire.
So I know a little bit about this. So what it is that you normally have sort of blocks along in hot countries where it's normal for it to be extremely hot. You normally have sort of blocks either side of the train track, which cause it to not expand and bend when it expands. It keeps it in the rough, correct position. That's more expensive, and because we don't have, or at least historically haven't had, as hot summers as other countries, we haven't invested in that infrastructure because it was unnecessary, right? It's like you don't build things for hot weather, for extreme hot weather in a country where there isn't extreme hot weather. Now that this is happening, we may well start investing in that kind of stuff. Yeah. But basically, it's just to do with different designs for train tracks in different countries.
And like adding on to that as well, like I think someone in the chat mentioned Texas. Remember when Texas had that sort of cold snap recently?
Oh yeah,
and
that's right.
Their infrastructure wasn't prepared for it. Texas is not attached to the rest of the grid in the US, the electrical grid. So there were floods, power outages, just because it got a little bit cold.
Yeah.
Now it gets much colder than that in the UK. I'm pretty sure. And it seems a little odd to be laughing at Texans who are dying and losing their homes and whatnot because they live in a different climate. Like it's it's just a bit of an odd thing to do. But getting back to it, there were, as I said, fires across London, people being evacuated. Last year, during the 2021 heat health alerting period, which is between the 1st of June to the 15th of September, there were 2 periods that met the UK Health Security Agency's definition for analysis purposes. Essentially, if they've got a few criteria that if it goes above that sort of temperature, they analyze it and see how many see what's going on and see how many deaths there are and track it and all of that sort of stuff. There were 2 episodes last year. The first one lasted 8 days from the 16th to the 23rd of July. And the second one lasted 4 days from the 6th of September to the 9th of September. And I'm just going to give you the estimated all-cause excess mortality, which is essentially the deaths above what you'd expect to be normal for that period. So for the first period from the 16th to the 23rd of July, that's the number is 915 estimated excess deaths. because of the heat. And from the 6th of September to the 9th of September, 719 excess deaths. That's all-cause mortality, right? And like my point here is, what I'm trying to get across to you is, heat waves kill people. This isn't just I'm a bit toasty. I can't deal with it. People are dying, not just elderly people. Fit, young, healthy people are dying because of the heat in the UK. But why is it? Why is it like hotter in the UK at the same temperature as elsewhere? You know, let's say you're in Palm Springs. Why is it that if you're in Palm Springs at 110 degrees Fahrenheit, you're feeling cooler than you are in the UK at 100 degrees Fahrenheit? Do you have any ideas?
It's humidity, isn't it?
Well, humidity is one of the major ones, yeah. So this is from a Met Office spokesperson. The level of humidity can be higher than in the UK than in continental Europe and obviously elsewhere as well. Humidity is high. If humidity is high, it is harder for the human body to keep cool as your sweat doesn't evaporate as quickly. Yeah. This is made worse given that we are experiencing more tropical nights where temperature doesn't go below 20 degrees, meaning that we get no respite from the heat and time for our body to recover. So high humidity means that your body's natural temperature control system just struggles to work. So the way that you usually sort of control your temperature, one of the main ones, you're probably aware of this, is sweating. I'm doing it right now, as you can see. So what happens is the sweat glands on your body, if you're watching me right now, they're doing it, you can watch that, they will release sweat, water with some other stuff in it. You don't need to worry about what sweat actually is. Basically, they will release sweat, a liquid that gets onto your skin. Now, this liquid on your skin, it doesn't make it you cooler in and of itself. What happens is it essentially takes the heat from your skin and uses that to evaporate. So when it evaporates, it kind of steals some of the heat from your skin. Now, evaporation is when a liquid essentially becomes a vapor, right? Yeah. It's no longer just a liquid sitting on your skin, it's in the air. You've got water vapor in the air at all times. You could feel when the air is dry, you can feel when the air is more humid. There's water, think of it kind of being like tiny little drops of water being kind of dissolved in the air. Think of it that way, yeah? Now, it is easier for something to evaporate when there is, think about it this way, right? It's easier for something to evaporate when there is, obviously there's lower humidity, because think about it like filling space. If there's more humidity, if it's more humid, then there's less space for that, sweat on your body to evaporate into. That's not exactly how it is, but that's the easiest way to think of it, right? Higher humidity means less evaporation of sweat from your body, which means that sweat is just sitting there and not cooling you down. So one of your body's main systems to cool you down just is not working because it is too humid. Now, if you look at the humidity in the UK, I'm pretty sure it was reaching like way higher than it was in the 40% at least, right? Do you remember?
I saw higher than that.
Higher than 40. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't find exact specific numbers on it because people don't talk about humidity as often as they should. Yeah. But when you're looking at the temperature that it is in a country or in an area, if you're looking at the weather, you cannot just look at the just baseline temperature in Fahrenheit or Celsius. You've got to look at the humidity as well, because that affects how hot it feels. That's why, Luke, as you were pointing out earlier, that a hot day in the UK can feel much hotter than a hot day abroad.
Yeah, I've spent many years in Australia during the summer where it's been mid-40s, in Celsius, 45 degrees Celsius. And I would take that any day over some of the mid-30 days I've had in the UK. They're just horrible. In Australia, the humidity is basically as close to zero as you can get. It's quite dry heat. So it's nice. It's nice to feel it on your skin. But it's just in the UK, it's so much stuffier and stickier, and you can't feel like you can't breathe properly because of the heat. Yeah,
I mean, I remember there was really high humidity in, I think, Texas, in Houston, when one of the first days I was there. And you step off the bus and it's like walking through soup. You can feel that the air is different. It obviously looks the same, but it just feels so different. And coming back to the UK, trying to sit in the evening in a house that has, no AC is really difficult. And that kind of brings me on to my next point. The next factor that makes it incredibly difficult to deal with high temperatures in the UK is that buildings just aren't built for it. So, our infrastructure is not made to deal with temperatures like this. If you live in a Victorian home, they are built to retain as much heat as possible. Like this room that we're in right now, this little attic room, is impossibly stuffy. It's very, very warm. It retains so much heat, and it's wonderful in the winter. It's wonderful when Britain is cooler, and it usually is colder. I mean, the temperatures that we've got, right now are nowhere near what they used to be when a lot of our houses were built. Think about this. People used to ice skate on the River Thames.
Yeah.
I have never in my lifetime seen the Thames freeze, let alone freeze, fully freeze over to the point of being able to skate on it. That doesn't happen anymore in the UK. But maybe about 100 or so years ago, that was something that happened, regularly.
Yeah.
You were able to do that. So buildings in the UK are built for the cold. And what that means is that they retain heat. So when it gets really, really hot outside, the buildings stay warm and they don't let that heat go. The buildings have no idea how hot it is outside. All they can do is retain heat because that's what they're built for. So there's the fact that our buildings aren't built for it, but then also our infrastructure, like Luke, you were pointing out with the train tracks, they're not built for it. We don't have AC either. This is something that Americans, I don't think they'll understand if they've not been to the UK, because AC is just a standard in the US. The AC that I was on the bus that I was on when I was touring across the US, it broke, and so I've experienced the actual proper heat of the US, and it's just a lot of places are too hot, way too hot. But you step into a building, fresh cold air.
Literally any building as well.
Any building.
Yeah.
I don't think I walked into any single building that did not have AC. It's a standard there, whereas in the UK, most residential buildings.
Yeah, car has it.
Yeah, but then cars are just built with, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is it, more or less. I mean, obviously, you've got commercial buildings like new office buildings and whatnot. They will have AC.
Yeah.
Shops and whatnot, they will have AC. But residential buildings, older office buildings, or just older listed buildings, because you got to remember, our country is old. Our architecture is old, and when things get really old, we're not allowed to change them sometimes. You've got lots of listed buildings in the UK where the modifications that you're allowed to make are limited. So installing AC across an entire building can be difficult.
Yeah.
And we don't usually need AC. It's a luxury that is expensive and generally in the UK kind of unnecessary.
You need it for a few weeks a year in the UK if you're going to use it.
Exactly. So, and when that happens, it gets really, really hot. A lot of people will say, well, just buy an AC system for your house. One, we are going through a cost of living crisis that is unbelievable. It is impacting, everyone, really. I mean, obviously, if you're less wealthy, it's impacting you far, far more. But this is impacting people at pretty much every level in the UK, to the point where electricity and heating bills are soaring. People don't have the money to shell out on an AC system because, as well, in the UK, AC systems are way more expensive than they are in the US because we don't buy them. We don't need them.
I'd imagine they're also probably, not gas, sorry, I'm speaking American. If the petrol price is anything to go off of in the UK versus the US, it would be a lot more expensive to run an AC than it would be in the US. I don't know what the electricity rates in the US are like versus the UK, but if the amount of protests that happen when the petrol price goes up is anything to go by, I would imagine that electricity is also cheaper than it is in the UK.
Well, the electricity prices are rising as well anyway. Do you know what I mean? So even if it is cheaper even if it is the same kind of the same level in the US and the UK, those prices are rising and they're already unaffordable for a lot of people anyway. I mean, I was gone for a month and a half, 6 weeks, and my electricity bill was £20 cheaper than when I was the months when I was here, which is half the time I was gone.
Yeah, that's insane.
Unbelievable. So there's that difficulty as well. And not to mention the fact that, they're more expensive and it can be more expensive to run and all of that. They're really difficult to find. I mean, I don't know about you, but have you ever tried to look to buy a fan during one of the UK's heat snaps?
Yeah,
just a fan.
Insane.
All of them disappear. They are sold out everywhere. You can go to Argos and try and buy a fan. None. You could go everywhere. I remember when my office was going through a hot period and we could not find fans. We had to buy the most expensive Dyson ones that turned out to be air purifiers, right? It was so bloody difficult.
We were breathing well that summer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just fans. AC systems, we already don't have many of them. Because we don't buy them. And think about this. an AC system is a difficult thing to install. You can't just install the ones that sit out your windows because our windows don't work like that. You know, you've got to have the big blocky things take up space in your house. You might not have a place to put it. You know, you might not be able to run it. All of these, you've got to take into account all of these things. It's not quite as simple as just buying an AC system in the US and installing it in your house, or living somewhere where the AC already is. So there's that. There's also the fact that we don't have upper end working temperature limits in the UK. What I mean by that is that there is a lower limit. If it gets too cold in the UK, you can say, you know, there's a lower limit to how, you know, to how cold it can be before you have to stop working. But there's no higher temperature limit in the UK for how hot it can be before you are legally allowed to say, I'm not working, you know? So there, like, businesses can still remain open and people can be getting, you know, heat exhaustion and heat stroke just because they're forced to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And everywhere else will have, like, not everywhere else, but a lot of other countries have, you know, those upper limits for how hot it can be before you know, you're allowed to stop working. We don't have that because we don't usually get to being so hot that it becomes impossible to work. You know, and I remember actually looking this up back in, you know, about 2019, back when I was working in an office. In 2019, it got incredibly hot for a few weeks.
And I researched my rights.
Well, we all were looking them up to see whether we could say, hey, we don't have AC in the office. Like, we can't work in this. You know what I mean? You need to do something about it. And we had no legal leg to stand on. So because of that, there's not necessarily an incentive for employers to make those changes to make, you know, workplaces more like livable, survivable in those temperatures. So if you look at all of this together, what you can see is you've built a picture of the UK that doesn't have an infrastructure to handle high temperatures, is hot, it feels hotter on average because there's usually higher humidity in the UK. You've got people that aren't accustomed to those kinds of temperatures, and so their lifestyles aren't, you know, built around them. We don't have, you know, pools and other things that make it easier to deal with the heat. This entire country is built for a different climate, and part of climate change is the climate changing. I don't know what people think climate change means, because they'll talk about, oh, climate change bad, oh, things are happening, oh, look at these wildfires, look at this, look at that, look at these natural disasters, and then something happens in the UK because of climate change, and people will sit and laugh about it. People are dying.
Pussies.
You realize that the deaths that they warned us about, the deaths due to climate change that they were warning us about, are happening now in these heat waves? That's what these are. And there are some things that we can do to adapt, right? So there are different solutions. There are like nature-based solutions where essentially, you know, you build greener infrastructure. You know, you've got more tree cover to provide shade so that, you know, roads and whatnot don't heat up nearly as much. You've got sort of connecting sort of wildlife populations in different areas of habitat and creating sort of cooling systems through that. You've got building cities in different ways so that they can sort of deal with heat better. Painting roofs white is another one. Luke, you spoke about that on Sci Guys. Yeah, you spoke about that on Sci Guys Live a while ago. Yeah, all of these sorts of things, and not something that's pointed out in an Enviromedia article. A lot of the, like, you know, there's a lot of racism and classism when it comes to, you know, building and, you know, city planning. And that ends up meaning that essentially those communities get hit a lot harder by the heat than others. What?
That's crazy.
What? Racism and classism in the UK? Oof. Institutionalized and across multiple levels of life?
Not in my country.
I'm going to have to intervene.
So obviously making changes like that, you know, changing, you know, like adding more tree cover so that we've got, you know, cooler areas of shade to sort of escape into, adding greener infrastructure which can kind of cool down, I think that kind of cools down the air in some way, and changing the way that we build houses, painting roofs white, new builds essentially being built facing sort of the correct direction so that we've got good winter sun and are still shaded from the summer sun. All of those sorts of things would really help. Also, as well, high temperature limits for work. You know, have a maximum limit of maximum working temperature.
You think that anything over the, you know, the literal human body temperature of 37 degrees might be like a good place to start?
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's more than 37 degrees indoors where you're a business and you could reasonably install some kind of AC in order to help your workers. Let's start there.
Let's start. Yeah.
Maybe like 38 degrees, more than 37.
It seems like an obvious and very easy thing to do. Like, I can't imagine anyone contesting it. Imagine, okay, Tories exist, sure, but I can't imagine a Tory opposing that for any actual reason that they could explain other than, I hate the working class.
But you're forgetting that maybe they already have AC in everywhere they go, so they don't care.
But how do you justify that?
How do they justify most of the things they do?
No, but what lie? That's what I'm saying. What lie do you come up with to justify that? I genuinely can't think of one off the top of my head.
You would say you don't want to put undue pressure on businesses in these hard economic times.
Okay, that's just made me a little bit mad, so we're going to move on.
That's
because you're very good at this. You've been a good Tory. Wow. Very good Tory. That was a really good one. Wow. Is Rishi Sunak in the room with us? Did Priti Patel join? Is that Liz Truss's voice here?
We import 40% of all of our cheese.
That is a disgrace.
So, another sort of solution, I've kind of mentioned this already, is build better. So this is coming from the Met Office, from a spokesperson from the Met Office. We can no longer tolerate poor design of our buildings and our cities, and we urgently need to think about things like reducing overheating, shading, trees, building for cooling, and providing these public cooling spaces, because that's another issue as well that I kind of touched on. We don't have anywhere to cool down in public. You know, you can't stay at home. I was stuck at home during this heat wave. You know, I was supposed to have a meeting I was supposed to go to. I was supposed to meet a friend, and the trains were shut down. I couldn't walk out and go anywhere because it was far too hot. Sitting in my home was too hot. I had, trying to get some airflow going on. Nothing was working because our country isn't built for this, And on top of all of that, building better, having working, like maximum temperature working limits, the sort of nature-based solutions that I mentioned, all of that is really important and will absolutely help. But I think, above all, the most important thing is to stop climate change. Just put in a little bit of effort, just some effort to stop it, or to curb it, or all of this, because ultimately we can come up with solution after solution after solution for rising temperatures, right? We can find ways to build better and make it more habitable at temperatures like this. But ultimately, that's a band-aid. It's not fixing the core root of the problem. The core root of the problem is that carbon emissions are raising the global temperature. That's it, really. If we're being as basic as possible, climate change is the problem. That's what we got to focus on to fix it. All the rest of this stuff is just to keep us alive long enough to be able to solve the problem. But if we don't start solving the problem, we're going to run out of rope. There you go. That's my story. Stop climate change.
Moral of the story.
If you enjoyed that clip, head over to patreon.com/SCI Guys, where you can find the full show. Or you can stay here and catch up on old SCI Guys episodes. Or you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at SCI Guys Pod to find out when we're doing more live shows.